What if half the people you knew vanished within only a few years? Not through war, famine, or natural disaster, but something far stranger instead. Something invisible, unstoppable, and terrifying beyond anything medieval Europe had experienced. Imagine waking inside a thriving European city during the 14th century peacefully. Markets are crowded, churches are full, and life feels completely ordinary today. Nobody suspects that history is approaching disguised as routine commercial activity. Merchant ships arrive carrying silk, spices, precious goods, and hidden death. Trade connected continents, but it also connected populations to unforeseen dangers. The ships appeared harmless, even beneficial, as they entered European ports. Yet among the cargo traveled something capable of reshaping an entire continent. Rats and fleas carried passengers far deadlier than any invading army. No king, priest, or scholar recognized the threat approaching silently nearby. The danger remained invisible while embedding itself within everyday commercial networks. Europe welcomed prosperity without realizing catastrophe had arrived alongside it. History sometimes enters quietly before revealing its devastating consequences suddenly afterward. Port workers unloaded goods while unknowingly helping spread a deadly plague. Nobody understood what was happening because nobody had seen anything comparable before. The first signs appeared gradually, easily dismissed as ordinary illness initially. A few people became sick, then more followed unexpectedly across communities. Rumors spread faster than answers, while fear slowly replaced confidence everywhere. Strange symptoms emerged, confusing doctors and alarming entire neighborhoods rapidly. Europe stood at the threshold of one of history's deadliest disasters ever. The Black Death had arrived, and nothing would remain unchanged afterward. A continent's future was about to be rewritten through unimaginable suffering. At first, the illness appeared no different from other diseases commonly known. A fever here, weakness there, symptoms seemed manageable initially to observers. But soon the disease revealed a far more terrifying nature entirely. Victims developed painful swellings beneath their skin, alarming families everywhere immediately. The lumps grew larger while fevers intensified beyond anything expected normally. Many who appeared healthy one day were dying within days afterward. Doctors struggled desperately to explain what was happening across affected communities. Medieval medicine offered theories, but very few useful solutions against plague. Treatments failed repeatedly while death continued advancing through towns relentlessly. The symptoms became infamous, terrifying everyone who witnessed them firsthand personally. Swollen buboes appeared as visible signs of approaching death for victims. Fear spread almost as rapidly as the disease itself across Europe. Neighbors watched neighbors fall ill, wondering who would be next sadly. Every cough, fever, or weakness suddenly carried frightening new significance everywhere. Daily life transformed into an anxious wait for possible infection unexpectedly. Church bells rang constantly as funerals became an increasingly common occurrence. Communities accustomed to celebration now gathered primarily to mourn their dead. Loss became routine in places where normal life once flourished comfortably. Markets emptied as people avoided crowds and unnecessary social contact increasingly. Commerce slowed while fear began reshaping behavior across entire populations dramatically. The disease was no longer a rumor, but an undeniable reality everywhere. Streets grew quieter with each passing week as mortality rates climbed. Europe was entering a nightmare few could comprehend or escape successfully, and the plague was only beginning its devastating journey across continents. Once established, the plague followed Europe's trade routes with terrifying efficiency everywhere. Cities connected by commerce became connected by death just as quickly. The same networks creating prosperity now accelerated catastrophe across entire regions. Every arriving traveler carried potential danger into communities already under pressure. News of outbreaks reached distant towns before the disease itself arrived. Fear often entered first, preparing minds for the horrors ahead unexpectedly. Families faced impossible choices when loved ones showed signs of infection. Stay together and risk death, or separate and endure heartbreaking uncertainty. Many discovered that love itself had become a dangerous risk suddenly. Entire neighborhoods seemed abandoned as residents fled or perished tragically. Houses remained standing while the lives within them disappeared gradually afterward. Familiar communities transformed into ghostly reminders of what once existed. Physicians experimented with every remedy available through medieval knowledge desperately. Herbs, bloodletting, prayers, and rituals produced little meaningful success, unfortunately. The disease ignored social status, education, and authority equally without hesitation. Religious processions filled streets as people searched for answers and hope. Many believed divine intervention remained the only possible solution remaining. Others questioned long-held beliefs as suffering continued without explanation endlessly. Death arrived faster than burial systems could handle across numerous cities. Mass graves became necessary as traditional funeral practices collapsed entirely. The scale of mortality overwhelmed institutions designed to manage ordinary losses. Europe was no longer facing an epidemic confined to isolated locations. It was confronting a civilization-wide crisis unlike anything previously experienced before, and the psychological impact would prove almost as devastating as death. As deaths multiplied, many Europeans turned toward faith more intensely than before. Churches filled with desperate prayers seeking protection from an invisible enemy. People begged for explanations that medicine could not provide successfully anywhere. Yet the plague continued spreading despite devotion, rituals, and public prayers. For some, this raised frightening questions about long-held beliefs and assumptions. Why would suffering continue if prayers seemed unanswered by heaven repeatedly? Church bells rang so often they became part of daily existence. Each sound announced another loss, another family shattered by grief unexpectedly. Communities struggled emotionally as death became impossible to escape mentally. Many households lost multiple relatives within weeks or even days tragically. Grief accumulated faster than people could process their emotional pain fully. Survival itself became a source of guilt for some individuals afterward. Social order weakened as fear began influencing everyday decisions increasingly. Trust between neighbors eroded when anyone could unknowingly spread infection suddenly. Familiar faces became potential threats within a world transformed by fear. People avoided contact, gatherings, and even loved ones whenever possible cautiously. Suspicion replaced comfort in many relationships throughout affected communities broadly. Isolation became common despite humanity's natural need for connection deeply. Death seemed present everywhere, shaping choices both large and small continuously. The psychological burden reached beyond physical illness into existential uncertainty itself. Many wondered whether the world they knew was ending permanently altogether. Europe faced not only disease but a profound crisis of meaning. Confidence in institutions, traditions, and assumptions weakened under relentless pressure steadily, and soon the plague would begin changing society in unexpected ways. By the height of the plague, mortality reached unimaginable levels across Europe. Entire communities witnessed losses so severe they struggled counting victims accurately. Death became a constant presence rather than an occasional tragedy anymore. Houses stood empty where families had lived only months earlier peacefully. Markets once crowded with merchants now echoed with unsettling silence instead. The absence of people became one of the plague's clearest signs. Burial grounds expanded rapidly as existing cemeteries exceeded their capacity completely. Communities improvised solutions to cope with overwhelming numbers of dead continually. Few historical events had ever produced suffering on such a scale. Survivors faced emotional devastation alongside practical challenges of rebuilding life afterward. Every family carried stories of loss that would never be forgotten. The plague altered personal histories as well as collective memory profoundly. Region after region experienced similar patterns of illness and mortality repeatedly. The disease ignored political borders, languages, and cultural differences entirely. Europe shared a common tragedy unlike anything seen before collectively. Kings, nobles, merchants, and laborers all faced the same danger. Wealth could provide comfort, but not guaranteed protection from infection reliably. Social rank offered fewer advantages against disease than many expected previously. For perhaps the first time, mortality highlighted humanity's shared vulnerability clearly. The plague treated status and privilege with remarkable indifference everywhere consistently. This reality challenged assumptions supporting Europe's social structure deeply and permanently. The continent emerged from the crisis smaller, poorer, and emotionally scarred. Yet hidden beneath the devastation were seeds of future transformation already. The greatest twist in the Black Death story was approaching soon. Then something unexpected happened amid one of history's greatest human disasters. The plague destroyed lives, but it also transformed society profoundly afterward. Entire regions suddenly faced severe shortages of available workers everywhere simultaneously. Fields remained, homes remained, but many people were simply gone forever. Landowners struggled maintaining estates without sufficient labor to support production effectively. Economic realities began shifting in ways nobody had anticipated before. Surviving workers discovered their labor had become dramatically more valuable suddenly. Employers competed for assistance because labor shortages affected nearly every region. Ordinary peasants gained bargaining power rarely available under traditional systems previously. Nobles who once commanded obedience now faced practical limitations unexpectedly. Wealth alone could not replace workers who no longer existed anymore. Power relationships gradually adjusted to accommodate these new realities emerging. Many laborers negotiated better conditions, wages, and opportunities than before successfully. Their growing leverage reflected broader changes unfolding throughout European society steadily. Economic value increasingly shifted toward those whose work remained essential. The plague unintentionally empowered groups previously holding limited influence within society. Few people would have predicted such consequences during the darkest years. Yet catastrophe often produces outcomes impossible to recognize initially clearly. Long-standing social structures began showing cracks under demographic pressures everywhere. The traditional feudal order no longer functioned exactly as before effectively. Economic transformation accelerated because circumstances demanded adaptation from all classes. Out of devastation emerged opportunities for change on an enormous scale. The Black Death was not only ending lives, it was ending eras, and the consequences would shape Europe for centuries to come. Labor shortages continued reshaping medieval society long after plague outbreaks declined significantly. Survivors possessed options previously unavailable within rigid social structures before. Their work had become essential, granting influence many ancestors never enjoyed. Feudal estates depended heavily upon laborers to maintain productivity and wealth. Without sufficient workers, traditional arrangements became increasingly difficult sustaining themselves. The foundations of feudalism began weakening under relentless demographic pressure gradually. Laborers demanded better compensation because alternatives suddenly existed elsewhere too. Mobility increased as people sought opportunities beyond traditional obligations and restrictions. Economic necessity forced many elites to compromise with changing realities eventually. Long-standing assumptions about hierarchy no longer seemed permanently secure anymore. Social relationships adjusted as workers recognized their growing importance clearly. The plague had altered power dynamics in subtle but lasting ways. Towns and cities attracted individuals searching for better economic opportunities increasingly. Urban centers benefited from migration as populations slowly recovered afterward. New possibilities emerged where older systems once limited personal advancement significantly. Merchants and traders gained influence as economic activity evolved steadily. Wealth became connected increasingly to commerce rather than land ownership alone. These developments contributed to broader transformations across European society eventually. The old world had not disappeared entirely, but it was changing. Economic flexibility slowly replaced traditions that once seemed immovable forever. Few contemporaries fully understood the magnitude of changes unfolding around them. History often moves gradually, becoming obvious only when viewed afterward retrospectively. The Black Death accelerated trends that would reshape Europe's future dramatically, and its influence extended far beyond economics or population statistics alone. Beyond economics, the plague transformed how Europeans understood life itself profoundly afterward. Questions emerged that challenged assumptions accepted for generations without hesitation previously. People searched for meaning within suffering that seemed impossible explaining fully. Faith remained important, yet many struggled reconciling tragedy with expectations spiritually. Why had prayers failed to prevent so much devastation and loss? Such questions encouraged reflection throughout communities facing collective trauma deeply. Some thinkers pursued knowledge beyond traditional explanations offered by authorities previously. Curiosity about disease, nature, and observation gained greater importance gradually. Understanding became increasingly valuable in a world marked by uncertainty constantly. Old beliefs did not disappear, but they encountered growing scrutiny everywhere. Intellectual life evolved as people reconsidered assumptions about humanity and existence. The plague encouraged difficult conversations that might never have occurred otherwise. Scholars recorded experiences hoping future generations could avoid similar disasters someday. Knowledge became a tool for confronting uncertainty rather than merely enduring it. Lessons from tragedy contributed to gradual changes in thought and inquiry. Interest in medicine expanded because existing approaches had proven insufficient repeatedly. Observing reality carefully gained new value after years of confusion. Incremental advances often begin with questions born from painful experiences first. Europe recovered slowly, carrying scars as well as newfound perspectives forward. The continent that emerged differed significantly from the one entering crisis. Population losses changed society, but ideas changed its future perhaps even more. Recovery involved rebuilding not only communities but ways of thinking too. Out of immense suffering emerged transformations impossible to predict beforehand accurately. And the Black Death's greatest legacy was still unfolding gradually. As Europe recovered, subtle changes continued reshaping society beneath the surface. Recovery was not merely demographic, it involved profound cultural transformation too. New opportunities emerged because older structures had weakened significantly after catastrophe. Merchants expanded influence within economies, adapting to post-plague realities increasingly. Urban centers became important hubs for commerce, learning, and innovation alike. People sought new ways to improve life after experiencing immense loss. Cultural attitudes gradually shifted toward curiosity, creativity, and practical knowledge increasingly. The willingness to question assumptions encouraged intellectual growth across Europe steadily. Transformations, once unimaginable, became possible because circumstances had changed dramatically. Cities grew as centers where ideas could circulate more freely. Trade connected communities while spreading knowledge alongside economic opportunities increasingly. A more dynamic society emerged from conditions created by demographic upheaval. Scholars explored history, philosophy, science, and art with renewed enthusiasm. Intellectual exchange flourished in environments encouraging inquiry and experimentation more frequently. The foundations of future cultural movements were being laid quietly. Historians often debate the plague's exact role in later developments carefully. Yet few deny its contribution to Europe's long-term transformation significantly. The catastrophe accelerated changes already beginning beneath medieval society gradually. Looking backward reveals a striking contrast between pre-plague and post-plague Europe. Population, economics, culture, and thought all experienced lasting changes afterward. The Black Death destroyed much, but it also altered future possibilities. Out of suffering emerged conditions that encouraged renewal and adaptation eventually. History's darkest moments sometimes become turning points few recognize immediately. And that realization leads directly to the story's final twist. The Black Death remains one of humanity's greatest tragedies without question historically. Millions died, families vanished, and communities suffered unimaginable devastation across Europe. No interpretation should minimize the immense human cost endured collectively. Yet history often reveals consequences extending beyond immediate suffering and destruction. The plague changed Europe in ways contemporaries could never foresee clearly. What appeared solely catastrophic also became profoundly transformative over time. This is the story's greatest irony and most unsettling twist, perhaps. The disease that nearly broke Europe also helped reshape its future. Demographic collapse altered economics, society, and power relationships fundamentally afterward. Old structures weakened while new possibilities gradually emerged from crisis. Transformation arrived not despite the plague, but partly because of it. History sometimes advances through painful disruptions rather than deliberate plans alone. The victims never witnessed many changes their suffering indirectly enabled later. Yet their absence reshaped the world left behind for survivors profoundly. Future generations inherited societies transformed by demographic and cultural upheaval significantly. Economic flexibility, social mobility, and intellectual curiosity gained greater influence. Europe's path toward modernization became intertwined with memories of catastrophe permanently. The plague left scars, but it also altered historical direction fundamentally. Centuries later, historians still examine its effects across countless dimensions carefully. Few events have influenced so many aspects of society simultaneously ever. The Black Death was more than a disease. It was transformation itself. It ended millions of lives while helping end an entire era. The medieval world entered the plague and emerged profoundly changed afterward. And that is why the Black Death changed Europe forever.